All right, then. Here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you're new, welcome. Everyone else, what's up? How are we feeling? How's the weather where you are? What if we start there? How's the weather where you are right now? Me, it has certainly taken a turn for the fall, my friends. The leaves are turning and the windows are closed. I got a sweatshirt on. The temperature has dropped. We're in the home stretch of this year. Can you believe that? 2021. It's like a blur. It's just a blur. I will say, had a few W's this week. And somebody emailed me, what's a W? A W's a win. I had a few wins this week. I officially completed the backyard fence project. For those of you who've been following along, it's done. You know, there's a few small details here and there that I would criticize about my work, but hey, saved us a lot of money and felt very good about completing the project. I also finished painting the garage, which was on the list from a long time ago. Got that done. And fixed the front porch lights. Oh my God, I did electrical work. You see, I've been really trying this new thing out. Maybe we'll talk about it on the other side of today's talk. I've been doing a certain kind of meditation to tackle challenging tasks before me, one of which was an electrical issue with our front porch lights. But I did it. I did the magic and I made the electrical happen. I'll tell you about that later. But they were good W's, and really what that means is I have completed almost everything on my list of house projects. Like, we had a list of house projects when we moved in here 4.5 years ago. And, you know, I have my list, my wife's got her list, and I have checked off all of them except one now, basically, the attic, which is my space. Of course, it's the last one, and all it really needs is some reorganization. I kind of want to leave it raw. I don't want to finish it all off. I want to keep it this raw wood, I think. But in any case, it feels good to get everything done on a list that I made for myself 4.5 years ago. And it's just in time, too, because I have just embarked on a new project, which I'm feeling very excited about. I have begun production on a series of videos that I'm making to be part of an online teacher training. Yup, you heard that right. Yup, online teacher training. It's kind of a big deal for me. You know, I have done versions of teacher training over the last few years only as one-to-one mentorships. And prior to that, I was doing conventional 200-hour trainings in person at my center. And for the last 5 years, since 2016, I have been using online stuff. I've been doing online education, online classes long before the pandemic. And at this point, I just decided that there's all of this stuff that I have to offer that I haven't really had an opportunity to offer to people because it just hasn't been possible for them to come be with me. And I have got my mind around a way of doing it that I think is appropriate, that I feel will provide a good enough container for me to offer whatever it is I feel I have to offer. And so it's going to be a year-long program. I think it's going to start in January. There's still some details being worked out, but I'm super, super excited about doing it, and I'll be telling you more about it as it comes closer. So, for whatever that's worth, that feels kind of good. It feels good to be engaging in creation and also feeling like I'm not just waiting around, because I'm still trying to make in-person events happen, but I still don't know how to do it quite yet, and I'm still working on it, and it's still hard to know when that's going to sort out, particularly with any kind of international travel. It all seems like too much. So to focus my energies on creating something that I feel good about, and also having a new opportunity to study with people, you potentially, whoever you are, listeners of this show, in ways that I haven't been previously, that's going to be really cool. So, in any case, that's what's going on with me. And I'll certainly be telling you more about the online training in the coming weeks. And it's quite relevant to today's conversation with Brandt Passalacqua. Brandt has a yoga therapy training program, very well regarded, and I've been wanting to talk to Brandt for a while. He reminded me, you'll hear, that we had actually met before in passing like 20 plus years ago or something, but this is the first time I've ever really had a conversation with him. And we talk about the difference between yoga and yoga therapy, which longtime listeners know is one that I used to talk a lot about and I haven't been talking about as much, but I actually really enjoy this particular consideration of that topic that Brandt and I engaged in, and it was quite cool. I really enjoyed connecting with Brandt. We had a lot in common. And there's a lot here for you all to listen to. So I'm excited to be bringing it to you today. Real quick before we get to that, let me just mention that if you are looking for some simple and gentle practice that is specifically about easing difficulties and loving ourselves, then I do offer weekly live stream classes that you can subscribe to. And if you are someone out there who listens to this show, who talks back to the show and wishes that you had an opportunity to be in these kinds of conversations yourself with fellow teachers, well, I have a weekly teachers call where that happens. And then I have a whole bunch of other stuff, on-demand videos and the archives of this show and my blog, and even just a way to send me a note if you want. All of it can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think we'll just leave it there, and I will touch base with you on the other side. But I'm very excited for you to hear this. So let's get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Brandt Passalacqua. Are you there? Is anyone there?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
How you doing?
Hey, Brandt.
It's great to talk to you.
It really
feel like
is.
I know you better than I do.
Well, that's funny. I was going to say a similar thing to you. I was going to say it's great to talk to you. I've had it in mind to talk to you for a long time. We've never really met, though. We just have a couple of mutual friends.
I did meet you.
When?
No, I've met you a long time ago, because I only know this because I just sort of remembered your name, but then, I've seen pictures of you, and I'm like, oh, I met you at the Breathing Project, I think.
Okay.
Long time ago. I mean, I don't know how old you are. I'm 50, but I was there maybe I met you 20 years ago, 15, it was a long time ago.
I think that's about right. And I was at the Breathing Project, so if you hung out there some, then we definitely met. Wow, what a trip. Do you remember what it was? Was it a class or like an event or anything?
I think like we were in the same zone. It was back, like, I kind of started doing stuff for like 2001. I just feel like I think we were in the same Yeah, I was there a bunch, and I know I'm really bad with remembering things. Unfortunately,
That's okay.
With my musician
okay.
past. But
Well, wait a second. It's interesting that you say you're musician past, because that's actually where I was going to start, because I was playing bass in bands in New York City from like 1995 to like 1998 before I really got more serious into yoga. And I know that you were doing music before yoga became your thing. And I was just curious, like, what was your instrument? What was your player? You're a bass player, of course.
I played in this band called the Binzie Poplars that were kind of popular. I did a lot of gigs, but I played in this band called Basque, which was just me and a singer. I was like, but we toured all over the country, but we were in New York then for sure. I don't know. I played all the places though. I mean, like we've probably seen each other.
Continental and
everywhere.
Mercury Lounge and all those spots, right?
Yeah, and I played with some bigger bands and some like not. So I've played all of them. You know what I mean? Like I played like every variation there was in New York. I think I've played there.
Well, there was a lot of opportunities to play. I mean, we gigged out a lot. We did one tour around the country in the back of a van, just one, and the band like didn't even really survive. Kind of it, it was.
I did
great.
That for 10 years.
See, 10 years. I did it once for it was like some weeks. We went all the way to the other end of the country and back. And I was like, okay, I did that once. I don't know if I need to do it again.
Yeah, we did more like, we'd leave and play like Albany, Boston, Maine. I mean, we went all over the country eventually, but it was like a lot of these like 4 gigs and back home, 6 gigs and back home, kind of. I did that for
what was the flavor of music? What were your inspirations?
It was a super weird. I have a lot of influences, but like I came out of like that sort of alternative kind of Cure U2-y, all that stuff that was happening. So I played in this band, the Binzie Poplars, that the guitarist is actually the guitarist in the Roots now.
Okay.
But we were like super, but he's a black guy, he's in the Roots, but he's like from Long Island, was a metalhead, but was like this amazing alternative kind of rock guitarist. And the singer I ended up playing with in this other project. So I played with that for years, but I actually went to Berkeley for drums. And when I was there were like no bass players. So my roommate was like, "Oh, you should learn how to slap." This is like 1989, right? So I like became this like monster flea imitator type,
My inspiration was Mike Watt. Mike Watt. Oh yeah, he was like my from Minutemen. He was like, I saw him play in the back of a guitar store, and he was so amazing. I decided.
No, I've seen him. Yeah. Well, I grew up in the punk scene in Boston. Yeah. That's like I played. That's what I did in high school, basically. Like I played.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're from the same. Are you married? Like, were you married then?
No.
Because I feel like I might know your wife. Who's your wife?
My wife's name is Audrey, and I don't know if you would know her. We didn't get together until much later, till like 2004, 2005. After I kind of let go of the music thing.
No, I know, but I think all right.
You might have met her. She might have been with me at one of those events or whatever. Or,
I think I met you with your girlfriend or whatever, like.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's possible.
But I know you know Joe.
Yes, Joe and I, that's one of the, there's 2 connections off the top of my head. Joe and I have had many conversations specifically, and we could get into that today, about the differences between yoga and yoga therapy. And I will say, of all the people I've ever talked with about it, Joe makes the strongest case. And so he was excited. For me to talk to you. And I was like, yes, totally. And then you also have met my friend and business partner, Josh Citron, at a party.
Josh actually lived in co-housing where I lived for a minute with my ex-wife.
Oh, you lived in that co-housing place. I've been there.
I moved there when I moved to Northampton. I see Josh he does this karaoke thing. I know everyone who goes, we're in town in this little town. So yeah, I totally know Josh. So.
Well, the other thing that I did notice that felt like we had some in common was I heard you tell the story of dealing with death at a young age, and that playing a role for you in terms of your yoga practice and healing. And the same was true for me. My mom died when I was 16. So being pissed off in music and unhealthy, and then finding my way out of that through yoga sounded like a similar song to you.
Yep, for sure.
And but what else I heard you mention, and it was from a while ago, and it is so strange synchronicity. You also mentioned that 9/11 had some particular significance. Like it marks a different anniversary for you. And it was just like two days ago or whatever.
I got out of the hospital in New York and from a huge autoimmune disease that almost killed me on September 10th. And I woke up to that. I had NPR on like all night. I like slept with it, which is super healthy mental hygiene wise. But I just got out of hospital. I couldn't walk. I was really sick. And that's what I woke up to. So I was like recovering slowly through that whole post 9/11 period. Like that was my experience. So it was like this really trippy, because I was having this almost survivor's euphoria thing.
Had you had like a procedure, or were they just treating you?
No, I had an autoimmune disease called autoimmune hemolytic anemia, where your body attacks its own red blood cells. And I died on the tape. I mean, I was in intensive care for weeks. Ooh. And I was in Methodist in Brooklyn. And the prognosis was not good. Like I wasn't supposed to live. That's how I got into yoga. And somebody taught me yoga nidra. And I couldn't sit up or walk. And I literally spent months doing yoga nidra as my exclusive activity. And that's how I got into yoga.
Wow. Just like sitting and listening to yoga nidra meditations?
I learned it with a few recordings. And then it was like a 5 kosha style. And then I got really into it. And I did it. I literally did it like 6 to 8 hours a day. Going over and over through this process.
Was there no like treatment plan for it?
There was no treatment. I was supposed to die.
Wow.
And now I'm here. So.
And so what happened in the course of a year? So what happened in the course of a year doing yoga nidra when you're supposed to die?
Well, then I did that and I started getting better, and it kind of comes in waves.
So like you have flare-ups or whatever?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had no quadriceps left. I was on like mega doses of steroids. I was on a like Yahoo support group from like, it was really rare. Like people get it when they get chemo and stuff, but it's pretty rare to get it for no reason.
And they didn't have any idea why you got it, or you didn't have any idea?
Well, I have an idea because I was doing this like construction project where I was like scraping mold. And then next thing I knew, I'm dying in the hospital, But I wasn't starting from a good place. I was obese and, an alcoholic and, so it wasn't like I had a good baseline.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah. And then all these people in this Yahoo group, like, he's like, my hematologist was like, oh yeah, we'll probably have to remove organs and all this stuff. And, it taught me, I mean, I guess the very short version is, I learned how to go like sort of deep into my different bodies. I learned how to like really understand my own energetic body. And I had these like crazy big, what I figured out later were like samadhi yoga experiences. 'Cause who does that? Who spends all day doing, like nobody really does that, So I was like this enforced meditation training, right? So, and I completely surrendered into my experience, and then I got better.
And is that what you attribute it to? You attribute to getting better to releasing into your energetic body?
Well, I would say that amount, and from this perspective, and from a more like sort of health perspective, I would say, I guess what I'd say is I got out of my own way, and I learned how to do like incredibly deep constructive rest, which we now know changes your brainwave states and changes the way your body heals. So from like this perspective, after like, studying and working in the yoga therapy field all this time, I basically did that full time. So I was getting, between sleeping and doing yoga nidra, I was getting 16 to 20 hours a day of those brainwave states. So, and I've used that in autoimmune work since then.
I imagine you have. Those experiences like become the basis of probably what you teach, but
pretty much everything.
Yeah,
to be honest.
But those direct experiences, absolutely, it makes perfect sense to me. I guess what I'm curious about is that process of healing, I imagine there were other things that you were doing as well, other choices that you were making, not just doing yoga nidra, that were contributing, though, right?
Yeah, although, the whole first part was that because I couldn't do anything else. I was literally lying on my back all day. So
Right.
there weren't a lot of choices for me to make. And then once it took me a long time to be able to walk again, like exercise or anything like that. And then, and then I kind of stumbled into a yoga studio. I started doing like what regular people do when they start yoga. But at
that time in New York, I guess, or was that where you were in New York?
Yeah, I was in Brooklyn. So there was a little studio up the street, and I went there, and I started doing yoga, and I went to a class, and then like I practiced all week, and then I went back to the class because the only things I had done is like played music, and I did some martial arts as a kid. So I figured you were supposed to practice, and then I went back, and after a few weeks, the teacher was like, "Wow, you're," it wasn't like I was particularly impressive or anything, but she was like, "Wow, you've really improved." Like I could barely move when I got there,
Right.
And I said, "Yeah,
but you'd spent a lot of
day." Well, I literally do the class that she taught. I thought I was supposed to do. I didn't know that people didn't do that.
Yeah.
So I did yoga. I like practice. I did like an hour or so of asana as best I could. And then I would do pranayama, and then I would do yoga nidra, and then I would meditate. I did the whole thing every day.
Yeah.
And so that really helped. And then, so that was really transformative for me. I'd basically, in addition to all my trauma, I had like a full-blown anxiety disorder going on most of my life and other things. So that started to clear it up,
I hear you. And I think that there's a certain fervor. I had it too, where I did practice like that religiously too. I had a period of time where I had this apartment in the Lower East Side for like $400 a month, and I didn't need to make a lot of money, and I was delivering weed, and I had my rent paid plus, and I knew that wasn't a long-term scenario.
Right.
And I just did practice, but I had massive anxiety and insomnia, and I didn't do yoga nidra, but I would do these really long shavasanas, like an hour and a half shavasana and stuff. Like
same difference.
Basically, I didn't have any formal like training in it or whatever, but I definitely remember like being in like a panic state and like making myself just lie down still. And that was just the practice. Just lay down and don't move no matter what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate, right, that I had gotten so sick that I like, it's a real gift if you don't die, because you're like, what would it be like if I just like surrendered into my body, and just didn't fight at all? It usually takes people like 20 years to figure that out, right? Like practicing. So.
Well, I heard you talk about that in another interview, that you had that moment where you feel like you decided to stay.
Oh, in the house. Yeah. Yeah, I decided to stay.
And when you think back on that, are you glad you did? I guess that's a dumb question, but why?
I'm really glad I did.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. Like if you come up against it, and it was interesting to hear you say that you weren't scared to go the other way, but why did you decide to stay?
Honestly, at the time, it was for other people. It wasn't about me. And that, I mean, in a way, like that's when I was in the hospital, I like died on the table. And so that was my experience. And
what did you see? Did you see stuff? Do you remember that?
I had a kind of like narrowing white light tunnel kind of experience. I'm not a religious person. So, in retrospect, it just feels like, it felt to me like I was falling back. And if I kept falling, I was never coming back again. Sort of like you're falling asleep almost, similar, but different. It felt different, but that's the only thing I could think of that's like a common experience. And then, I heard the people around me, I mean, they were yelling, but it felt very distant. And there was this moment where I decided I should probably come back, but it didn't feel like self-centered at all. Like I didn't need anything. I just felt like I should probably do that. And I had the capacity to, so I did. It was, And now, you see, to me, it's like, oh, we all have these choices, right? Little and big all the time.
That's right. Well, that perspective,
yoga,
well, when you have that kind of experience, that's what reason I bring it up again, because I think it fuels a sort of kind of passion. Like yoga practice for me, it sounds like for you, became like a vehicle to figure out what happened there. Like, oh, what happened when I was standing next to my mom when she was dying? Like, what was that? Like, I felt something, I experienced something. What is that? And yoga, like of all the things that I discovered, and I tried like different movement modalities. I like did postmodern dance stuff and all this other stuff first.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But when I got to yoga, I was like, oh, this feels like where I can understand what's happening more or something.
Yeah, the yoga, well, that was my experience too. Like the yoga has made it really clear. But the original kind of seed, I got kind of lucky to get it was almost like a freebie,
Yeah.
Like you're so close to it that you get this insight and you don't have to work for it.
Yeah. It's a strange.
Now we work, right? Like now we work for it.
Well, it's just a little more. Yes, it's a strange paradox though, because I heard you say like that illness was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I feel the same way about my mom's death. But it's a weird thing. It's like the most painful thing that's ever happened to me. But it led down the road that I'm on, which I would never want to be on any other road than this or whatever, like you said.
Right. And that's it's so hard to talk about karma with people that don't have, everybody has experiences, but I think these bigger experiences allow you to understand that concept for real,
Yeah, I guess.
That's how I see it.
Yeah. It definitely gives you a longer view or something, for sure.
Yeah, and you can only be you, and you can only be you with the experiences you've had.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
speaking of those experiences, so you stumble into yoga classes like I did. Do you remember like the first place that you went to in New York City when you went to class?
I do. It was. I think it was called Park Slope Yoga. It was like this little place near the park.
Okay.
Like 5 blocks from my house, and there was this teacher there.
Like what, vinyasa?
No, it was. She was an integral teacher.
Okay.
And did some other things. Yeah, it was sort of like, how it is. You go to the ashram and then you make it a little more spicy when you leave the ashram. So people
right, because you got to sell it or whatever.
But it was before like yoga was so popular, so it was small and it was like in the neighborhood. Yeah. And the woman who taught me, this woman Prashanti, was great and super helpful. And then I ended up taking because of that, I ended up taking integrals teacher training. Because
so you learned like what, the eye rolls and the shavasana between each
the whole
one,
thing,
right?
the script.
Yes,
I wore white and taught the script, and I loved it. Because for me, that whole service part was completely making sense. My life had completely changed, and I was like, I'm just going to do things in service of.
You were ready for surrender. You were like, I surrender.
Ready. I was all in. I was just like all in. I was like, this is a much better way than I've been living. And in that process, I didn't mention this, but like in that process, like I had been obese and I started losing weight.
Right. I saw you've done a lot of programs to help people with that because you went through that too.
Yeah, it's a big part of my work is eating disorders and weight loss. Weight loss like obesity, not.
And does that, it doesn't sound like you started doing yoga to lose weight, but you did lose weight.
Yeah, it was a side effect because, I would say now it dealt with my vata imbalance, but it dealt with my anxiety issues, which were like the stem of a lot of my eating, and gave me some clarity where I could take action in terms of how I took care of myself, which I wasn't able. Like before that, I had spent years, like I would run, I do all the things people tell you to do, but it doesn't really change your sort of calories in, calories out ratio, as science now tells us.
I heard you talk about in that another interview. It was very interesting about how this like idea we have in our heads about, going to the gym to lose weight doesn't actually work. Like it makes you more hungry. It doesn't actually.
Yeah, well, it's facts now. It changes your hormonal balance. You don't see people. Well, I'm always talking, when I'm talking about that stuff, I'm talking about people who are actually obese. Or seriously overweight. And we know now, there's science behind it, which is great. I mean, there never was. So people would just say, and people still do. They're like, oh, well, exercise more. But the reality is, like, you take obese people and they exercise more and they don't lose any weight. So that's not a truth. So part of that, the first thing you learn in yoga training is that, right? Like, tell the truth, be truthful.
Hopefully that's in there somewhere. Yeah. Well, okay, so you did integral training, but you didn't like become a disciple or live in the ashram, or did you?
I didn't live there. No. I lived in Park Slope in my house. I liked it there better. No, but I was pretty into it, and I really enjoyed the teachings. But I wasn't enthralled with the sort of power structure.
Right. That's kind of what I'm getting at. And there was sort of like three. There was the Sivananda crew, there was the Ashtanga crew, and there was the Iyengar crew. Yeah. Those were the big three.
Yeah. And I once I got better, this is after I was sick, I went around probably like you did, and I did all the things.
Tried all of them. Yes, me too.
Yeah. and I really enjoyed like the moving and breathing stuff made a huge impression. Vinny Yoga made a huge impression on me.
Yeah.
Leslie Kaminoff made a huge impression on me, like just the way he talked about stuff.
Yes. Me too.
And, but yeah, I sort of, the integral thing, the New York version of it, I was pretty much all in. But not so much the global, guru crew. And I'm not criticizing them. It just wasn't my thing. But I mean, until recently, I've been to the ashram down south like every year. It's a place I really love. And
just go pay a visit.
Yeah, and it kind of like brings me back to my roots, and I actually appreciate guru yoga.
Yeah, but it's so problematic, Brandt. All the gurus turned out to be sexual abusers, and
right. Well, for me, this is the best thing. It's like I didn't know Satchidananda, so it's easier to take the teachings.
Yeah.
When there's not an actual person there that's doing horrible things to people or whatever's going on, when it's just a set of teachings. And I've also appreciated what like Guru Mai did with Siddha Yoga. My wife actually grew up in that ashram, and she shut it down basically.
Yeah.
Right? Closed it to the public. The teachings are the thing.
Yeah.
And you don't get into those issues anymore. So that's lovely.
Yeah, but it's what you said, like the being able to take the things that were taught, the tools that were useful, and utilize them in a way that isn't like appropriating, like still gives proper credit to where they come. You know what I mean? Like, because that's an issue. When you try to divorce it from the gurus, you're appropriating, but you have to some degree, because some of the gurus are not like the saints that people made them out to be. And so they have to be brought down to a place where you can take teachings from them and separate teachings from teacher or whatever.
Yeah. And, look, most of the stories around the gurus are not the truth, and so that's not going to work. That
you mean in terms
works.
Of like their powers and their origins and stuff like that?
Their origins and this idea, since we're just talking and it's you,
Yes.
This whole idea, it's the same with religion, it's like of celibacy. Like I've met people who were really damaged by those concepts.
Yes.
And made to feel bad about themselves for their own sexuality. Mm-hmm. Most of the gurus were from religious places, so people felt bad about wherever they stood in there. So any modern person knows that's not great.
No, it led to all kinds of crappy shit and people getting hurt.
This happens in every religion. It's the same. So, but I've always kind of, I do have to say, one of the things that influenced me personally is I grew up Unitarian. And my mother's Jewish and my father is Italian Catholic. So they sent me to Unitarian church because kind of like, what are you going to do?
That was that happy middle or something, right?
Yeah. But this particular church, I don't know if they're all the same. I only went to one. But this particular one, Sunday school was like a sort of like world survey of religions. And it was almost like a religious philosophy class for like my entire childhood. Huh. And during that time, my sister and my cousin, who was like my brother, died. So I had these huge experiences early on with death, and in this community that really looks at, what's the same. and that's what attracted. So when I got back to yoga later, it seemed similar to me. I was like, oh wow, it's the same as what I grew up with. But the thing I grew up with was always missing something, and that was like this sort of personal transformative part of it. Where you actually learn practices, right, to actualize.
Yeah, things you can actually do. Yeah. I know what you mean. And what else I was thinking about in terms of teachers, because I was looking at your bio and I have this memory. I was at some series of meetings in 2009 at the IYT conference, and Mukunda Stiles was there.
Yeah.
And
my original guy.
Well, I know you study with him. That's why I'm curious about him, because my memory of him in that room was so interesting and very clear in my mind, which was that he had written that book, Structural Yoga Therapy.
Yep.
And when I had seen that title, I hadn't read the book, but I'd seen the title, and my thought was that he was going to be like a real science guy. Like he was like a PT turned, one of these PT turned yoga people or something. But in the room, he had such a presence, and the way that he spoke, he talked about Patanjali, and he seemed to me coming from a much older school, more guru tradition, not like a sciencey guy.
He had Muktananda's sandals in his closet where he meditated every day. I knew him really well.
So tell me about Mukunda Stiles, and when did you meet him? When did you start practicing with him? What was your experience of him?
Well, so I go to Integral Yoga. I'm a yoga teacher, and I'm trying to learn more about healing. So I'm studying all these different things, and there's a yoga therapy training. So, he comes to give an intro to that. And he showed us some of that structural yoga stuff and talked about the Yoga Sutras. So I picked up his book on the Yoga Sutras, and that translation kind of just blew me away. I was like, I have to study with this guy because I could actually read it. I don't know if you've ever read that translation, but
I think so at some point. I don't remember it off the top, but I read it at some point.
It doesn't have any commentary, right. but the translation, he took each sutra and made it into something that you could maybe understand. So that was lovely. So anyway, I studied with him and I did his training. He was doing 5 trainings around the US. It was his peak moment. And later I realized it was only him and Michael Lee from Phoenix Rising. They were the only 2 yoga therapy schools. That was it.
That's right. I remember.
Choices.
That's right. They were the only ones calling what they were doing yoga therapy.
Right. They were like, this is a yoga therapy training. I'm going to give you a certification. It was the beginning of all that. I didn't know, I was just taking it.
You were just into Mukunda.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Or were you thinking about getting a certification in yoga therapy and being a yoga therapist? Was that in your mind?
I was thinking about being a yoga therapist, but I was not thinking about getting a certification. As someone who runs an IYT school, I will say that now.
we could get to that, but that's why I'm curious, because at that time they were new. That meeting I went to was this. It was called the Council of Schools Initiative, and it was the first time.
Mukunda was on that. He quit that later, but he was on that. He was an early. Adopter of all this. So he had been to Mukunda had been to PT school, but was never a PT. So that's where that book came out. So he was into anatomy and he was interested in that, but really he was just a Bhakti.
Yogi. That's right.
Yeah, full on. So I guess I could talk a lot about him, but he taught me everything I teach now has roots in what he taught me. So it's not the same at all. But some of it is, and the frameworks he kind of developed from a mishmash of sources were really brilliant. And he, I also had I had that yoga nidra experience, but then I learned to meditate with him, and I had some really big experiences doing that, and then also. I got to sit in and watch him, practice yoga therapy with tons of people.
One-to-one, you got to observe?
Yeah, one-to-one. He would let a few of us watch if the person said it was okay. So we'd just sit in the corner and be quiet. So I got to see the full spectrum of how he worked. and how he ran.
That's the best training of all right there.
It was old school, right? That's how
Yes.
Krishnamacharya did it, right?
Yeah,
you just
yeah.
learned directly. So I learned from him, and honestly, I will say there's no way I would be doing what I am now without him, and I credit him for everything I do. And I got to see all the ways he messed up. And that was great too, because I actually got to see him working, and I got to think about it, and it wasn't this like, I'm going to protect my brand kind of moment, right? It was just a guy working. And then I knew him, and strangely, just because I know you like these kinds of stories. So like many yoga teachers, he ends up with one of his students, and he moves from Colorado. So I moved to Northampton, Mass. I'm living in New York. I have a child. I have a 3-year-old. I moved to Northampton. And literally at the same time, he moves 2 miles from my house, buys this giant house, turns it into a little yoga center with this friend of mine who was a student of his. And so my teacher is now next door, which is super weird. Because what's really the chance of that? And then, so I got to know him there too. And I got to have a lot of talks with him, and I got to watch how he operated there, So it's like, I got a lot of I just feel like,
to be clear, I don't like those stories at all. I don't like them, but they come up again and again and again because, I guess there's...
No, not the stories
people.
where he's with his student. I just meant stories like how your life actually works. That's what I meant.
Yeah. That is the story I like. I do like that.
That's what I meant. No, not that. It was a terrible choice on his part, and they ended up breaking up and stuff, but it was a terrible choice.
Yeah.
But just in terms of boundaries. But
seeing your teachers for the people who they are and their fallibility or whatever.
Yeah, and there was actually a moment where I've definitely never said this in public. There was a moment where my relationship changed. Like, he was my teacher, for reals, my yoga teacher for a long time. And then he was a guy I knew. It was in a minute, because I saw everything, and I said, there's nothing more for me to learn here. Yeah. And I think for me, it was really transformative because I was a little disappointed, but it really pushed me forward. I didn't get stuck anywhere. I was just like, that's no big deal. He's a person. Get over it and move on. And it was a great experience for me,
Well, that happened for me too. Definitely that moment where your teacher just becomes another guy that and you learn, and he helped me. He definitely taught me some really important things at a really important time that I continue to benefit from. But he definitely did some things that were disappointing and not cool. And I guess it's depending on depending on how much you get hurt by your teacher is how hard it is to reconcile.
Right. I want to say, since we're talking about it, he didn't really, in my view, I didn't see him hurt anyone. And the woman he ended up with, it was consensual, and I don't know, it didn't seem crazy. It wasn't one of these stories, so I don't want it.
Okay. It wasn't that bad, but still it was iffy.
It wasn't. I mean, I wouldn't date one of my students, but, they seemed happy enough for a while, and I don't think there was a huge power differential between them. What I mean? Because that was over her being his student. So I'm not judging that so much. It's just, he definitely kind of got to the end of his, I'll say his usefulness for me. And that's a great lesson. I'm people's teachers now, and I don't expect them to be my students forever.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I sometimes consider that a sign of success. Somebody doesn't need me anymore. They learned what I had to teach them.
Absolutely.
We did the thing. We did our job. We're good.
Yeah, you did your job. You shouldn't be in my school forever. That's a little weird.
That is. Well, I don't think we need to spend any more time on Mukunda and his personal life. What I think is interesting is that mix of and it's even on your website, from what I know of what you do, there is a very practical, use of kosha model and ways to help people really, I don't know, learn how to tend their gardens more fully, for lack of another words or whatever. Like there's a very clear, and I know I've talked with Joe about sort of like some of the stuff that you developed. But then I also know that in your like meditation work, I know you developed some meditation courses. There's a very like non-dual tantra philosophy base. And I'm intrigued by that. Like, cause it goes to this question of what the difference between yoga therapy and just yoga is. So well, at least for me, it does.
Yeah. So I guess your question is, what's the difference?
Well, I guess the question is, what's the difference? Like, well, the way that Joe framed, I emailed Joe, full disclosure. Okay. I emailed Joe before I talked to you today. And I was like, Joe, what do you think I should talk to Brandt about? You know Brandt way better than me. And he wrote this great sentence. I'll quote him. He said, because this is kind of what it came down to in our discussion, right? The kind of the difference between helping people find balance to aid suffering versus some idea of a spiritual evolution. And like that, like yoga practice is about a person's spiritual evolution, but yoga therapy is more specifically about like addressing someone's, I don't know. I'm trying to make the case, and that's not my view.
It's a difficult distinction. I'm not even sure it's an important one, to be honest.
Oh, but cool. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, because in a way, your spiritual evolution is tied to your like lessening of suffering. So,
right.
You know, they go together, but I think it's more about the calling or the vocation of a yoga therapist, where, you know, as a yoga therapist, my job is to help this person address the thing they have identified as their issue. So, you know, an example of that would be, you know, someone comes and they have really bad back pain, you know, and they're having trouble sleeping. And even though you could like make the argument that there are some evolutionary things someone could do to reduce both of those problems, that's not what they asked for. So, you know, as a yoga therapist, I say, okay, it's a bulging disc. Maybe we start with some mild back bending, you know, whatever. You know, I have my anatomy, and with the insomnia bit, it's like we have a way, you know, in our method, a lot of times we'll use like an Ayurvedic model to evaluate that. But the real difference is that my job is not to like sort of see how far I can get this person in terms of their personal evolution. And so a yoga teacher, you come to me and you say, I want to learn yoga from you, you know, I want to learn meditation from you, Brandt. I'm going to say to you, here is how you expand yourself. Here are the steps. Not based primarily on suffering necessarily. So that's where it splits.
I'm still not clear. I mean, it sounded like when I had Matthew Taylor on, he was the first one, and it's not like exactly what you're saying, but he basically said that the kind of name yoga therapy or calling it yoga therapy in certain ways was kind of a branding thing. It was kind of about being able to get research money and expectations that people had. Like it does set up like a very different dynamic. Like you say, someone comes, most people have like, a lot of people at least have back pain and insomnia when they come to yoga, whether it's a yoga therapist or a yoga teacher. And so when someone comes to a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist with those things, you apply sets of tools to help that. And that's where it's not clear. Like in my discussions with Joe, it always comes down to this idea of assessment. Like a yoga therapist is doing something in terms of assessment that a yoga teacher is not qualified to do. Do you think that's the case? Do you think a yoga therapist is assessing people in ways that yoga teachers are not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you elaborate? How so?
I think you call it branding, but it's more like, I think in our society, it's more like identifying someone's level of education a little bit, even though that is not a perfect system. And I've never been one, look, I have never been at the at the head of the certification bandwagon. And I'm someone who's, we certify people, we go through all the steps, we spend lots of times with spreadsheets, and, we do all the things that we're supposed to do. But I'm not so sure in every case this is an important distinction. But what I will say is when someone calls themselves a yoga therapist, they are telling you that they are educated in the thing that they are helping you with. So if I say I'm a yoga therapist who's works with trauma, then I'm telling you that I have reviewed the current research on yoga and trauma, that I have been taught by somebody with some experience, hopefully, who's worked with trauma. I have a method and a framework in which to view it through, and that's what I'll be doing with you, right? If you come to me, I guess.
I see. So are you suggesting that like a yoga therapy thing would be about like specific conditions? I think you can make that case. Like if you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.